"Drink this now. Trust me," she whispered urgently, sliding a fresh coffee across the counter instead of the poisoned one. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she maintained her practiced smile, eyes locked with the young man whose death had been ordered just minutes ago. The rain pummeled Chicago's streets like angry fists as Evelyn wiped down tables at Moonlight Cafe, counting the minutes until her shift ended. Tuesday nights were typically slow, giving her ample time to daydream about the photography classes she could barely afford on a waitress's salary. Jack Carson always arrived at precisely 10:47 p.m., claimed the corner booth facing both entrances, and ordered black coffee with a slice of apple pie. His expensive suit and quiet demeanor set him apart from the usual late-night crowd of taxi drivers and hospital staff on break. Tonight, something felt different about him, a tightness around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed against the worn tabletop in an irregular pattern. Evelyn noticed these details automatically, her mind cataloging information the way it always did when something felt off. The bell above the door chimed at 11:23 p.m., admitting 3 men in dark overcoats who shook rainwater from their shoulders like dogs. They took the booth nearest the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones that immediately made the hairs on Evelyn's neck stand at attention. She approached their table with practiced nonchalance, notepad in hand and a customer service smile plastered across her face. The largest man ordered 3 coffees without looking at her, his attention fixed on Jack's corner booth like a predator studying prey. As Evelyn turned toward the kitchen, the words "poison" and "boss's nephew" floated to her ears, followed by muffled laughter. Her steps didn't falter as her mind raced, processing what she'd just heard while reaching for 3 clean mugs with steady hands. Through the kitchen's service window, she observed the men watching Jack with calculation in their eyes. One man's jacket shifted, revealing the unmistakable outline of a shoulder holster beneath expensive fabric that seemed too fine for a casual coffee run. Evelyn's father had been a cop before a bullet claimed his life when she was 14. He'd taught her to trust her instincts above all else. Those instincts now screamed that the young man in the corner booth was marked for death unless she intervened. The decision crystallized in an instant. She couldn't stand by and watch a murder unfold in her cafe. With deliberate movements, she prepared Jack's usual refill in a fresh mug, ignoring the waiting order for the 3 men who continued their hushed conversation. Her heart raced as she approached Jack's table, sliding the untainted coffee toward him, while whispering her urgent command. His eyebrows lifted slightly, the only indication that her behavior struck him as unusual, before his gaze shifted to the 3 men. "Why should I trust you?" he murmured, voice low and controlled despite the warning she'd just delivered. His eyes, dark and analytical, searched her face for deception, while his fingers remained motionless beside the fresh mug. Evelyn leaned closer, pretending to wipe a non-existent spill from the table's surface. "Because those men just discussed which poison would be hardest to trace in your system, and I'd rather not mop your dead body off my floor tonight." Something dangerous flickered across his features. Not fear as she'd expected, but a cold calculation that transformed his handsome face into something predatory. He reached for the coffee she'd brought, maintaining eye contact as he took a deliberate sip. Behind her, chairs scraped against linoleum as the 3 men stood in unison, their reflection visible in the rain-streaked window. Evelyn felt the weight of their attention shift to her back, sending ice through her veins as she realized she'd just made herself a target. The tallest man approached, his smile revealing a gold tooth that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Excuse me, miss, but we ordered coffee several minutes ago," he said, voice dripping with false politeness, while his eyes remained flat and cold. Jack's hand shot out, wrapping around Evelyn's wrist with surprising gentleness, despite the iron strength she could feel beneath his fingers. "She's busy assisting me," he stated, voice transformed into something that commanded attention, expected obedience. The atmosphere in the cafe crystallized into something dangerous, as recognition dawned on the faces of the 3 men. The oldest one paled visibly, taking an involuntary step backward as his gaze recalculated the situation with growing horror. "Mr. Carson, we didn't realize it was you," the man stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. His companions exchanged glances loaded with panic, hands hovering near concealed weapons they suddenly seemed reluctant to touch. Jack smiled, a predator's grin that never reached his eyes, as he released Evelyn's wrist and stood slowly to his full height. "Yet you came here specifically for me, didn't you?" he asked, voice deceptively soft, as he straightened his already impeccable tie. The sound of distant sirens wailed through the rain-soaked streets, growing closer with each passing second. The 3 men's faces contorted with confusion, then understanding, as they realized they'd been outmaneuvered before they'd even begun. "I don't understand," the gold-toothed man began, but Jack cut him off with a raised hand that commanded immediate silence. Even Evelyn found herself holding her breath, caught in the gravity of his authority despite being a complete stranger. "My security team has been watching you since you entered Brighton territory 2 hours ago," Jack explained calmly, as if discussing the weather rather than apparent assassination attempts. "They called the police the moment you followed me inside." The youngest of the 3 men lunged suddenly, pulling something from his jacket that glinted metal in the harsh cafe lighting. Before Evelyn could scream, Jack moved with shocking speed, his coffee mug smashing into the attacker's temple with devastating precision. Glass shattered across the linoleum as the man crumpled to the ground, the gun he'd drawn skittering under a nearby table. The remaining 2 assailants froze, calculating their diminishing options as blue lights began to flash against the cafe windows. Jack turned to Evelyn, his expression softening fractionally as he took in her wide eyes and pale face. "I need you to come with me now," he said, voice brooking no argument despite its gentler tone. "You've just made some very dangerous enemies." Outside, cars with tinted windows screeched to a halt alongside police cruisers, men in suits emerging with weapons drawn. Jack guided Evelyn toward the rear exit with a hand at the small of her back, leaving behind the chaos erupting in the cafe. "Who are you really?" Evelyn demanded as they stepped into the alley behind the building, rain immediately plastering her hair to her face. The question seemed almost ridiculous given the circumstances, yet it was the only one her shocked mind could formulate. Jack paused beneath the minimal shelter of the back doorway, studying her face with newfound interest. "I'm the man whose life you just saved, which makes me responsible for yours now. The question is, who told you about the poison?" Evelyn shivered, suddenly aware of how completely her ordinary life had shattered in the span of 15 minutes. "Nobody told me anything. I overheard them talking when I took their order," she explained, watching his expression shift from suspicion to genuine surprise. "You're either the luckiest waitress in Chicago, or you've been playing a very long game," Jack muttered, guiding her toward a black SUV idling at the alley's entrance. Rain pounded the asphalt around them, washing away footprints almost as quickly as they formed. The vehicle's rear door opened as they approached, revealing a mountain of a man whose scarred face remained impressively neutral as he assessed Evelyn. "This the whistleblower, boss?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle despite his intimidating appearance. Jack helped Evelyn into the plush interior, before sliding in beside her, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and rain-dampened wool. "She's an unexpected variable, Theo," he answered, his gaze never leaving Evelyn's face as the door closed behind them. The SUV pulled smoothly into the storm-lashed streets, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against Chicago's notorious spring downpour. Evelyn watched familiar landmarks slide past, realizing with growing unease that each moment carried her further from everything she knew. "I can't just disappear," she protested, gripping the edge of the leather seat as panic finally began to claw through the shock. "I have a roommate, classes tomorrow morning, responsibilities. People will look for me." Jack's expression remained carefully neutral as he pulled a phone from his pocket and handed it to her. "Call whoever needs to know you're safe," he instructed, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "Tell them you're staying with a friend for a few days." Evelyn's fingers trembled slightly as she dialed her roommate's number, acutely aware of Jack watching her every movement with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. She manufactured a convincing story about covering shifts for a sick coworker at a different cafe location. 3 days, she stated after ending the call, handing the phone back with more confidence than she felt. "I've bought myself 3 days before anyone starts asking serious questions. Now explain why I'm in this car instead of talking to the police." Something like respect flickered across Jack's features as he pocketed the phone. "Because the men who tried to kill me tonight work for someone with cops on payroll," he answered bluntly, his gaze shifting briefly to the rain-slicked streets outside. "You wouldn't survive the night." The SUV turned down a ramp into an underground parking garage beneath a nondescript office building, the sudden absence of rain creating an eerie silence broken only by tires on concrete. Evelyn noted they passed no security checkpoint, no cameras, just darkness and emptiness. "I'm Jack Carson, head of the Carson Family Enterprises," he said finally, as the vehicle stopped near a private elevator. The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight and meaning that resonated with half-remembered news stories about Chicago's most powerful business dynasty. Evelyn's blood turned to ice as realization dawned. She hadn't saved some random businessman from poison, but rather the 28-year-old heir to one of Chicago's oldest crime families. "You're the Mafia," she whispered, her voice small in the cavernous garage. Jack's lips quirked slightly at her phrasing as he opened the car door. "I prefer Alternative Business Consortium. But yes, technically speaking, your current situation is significantly more complicated than you initially assumed," he replied, with unexpected dry humor. The elevator required no button press, simply opening silently upon their approach. "I don't make a habit of involving civilians in family matters," Jack continued once they were inside. "But you saved my life tonight, which creates a debt I take very seriously." Theo remained silent as he escorted them upward, his massive presence making the elevator feel suddenly claustrophobic. Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, mind racing through scenarios, each more implausible than the last as reality continued to crumble around her. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment that defied Evelyn's expectations. Not the ostentatious display of wealth she anticipated, but a space of understated elegance with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a storm-racked Chicago. Lightning briefly illuminated the skyline, creating the illusion that the city itself was photographing this moment. Jack moved immediately to a sleek computer setup, fingers flying across the keyboard, while Theo stationed himself by the entrance. "You'll stay here tonight where I can guarantee your safety," he stated without looking up, his tone making it clear this was non-negotiable. Evelyn folded her arms across her chest, rainwater still dripping from her work uniform onto imported marble flooring. "And tomorrow? Do you plan to keep me prisoner until whoever wants you dead gives up and moves to Hawaii?" Jack's typing paused momentarily as he glanced up at her, something like amusement flickering across his features. "Most people would be catatonic with fear in your position, yet here you are, demanding a strategic timeline," he observed, studying her with renewed interest. A wall panel slid open to reveal a hidden bedroom suite as Jack stood, loosening his tie with one smooth motion. "My Uncle Richard oversees our family's more traditional business ventures," he explained, gesturing for her to follow him deeper into the apartment. Evelyn hesitated before stepping forward, curiosity temporarily overriding caution as Jack continued. 3 months ago, I began transitioning our operations toward legitimate enterprises, real estate, tech investments, hospitality, moving away from the activities my grandfather established. The suite contained clothes in various sizes, toiletries still in packaging, and everything else a person might need if suddenly displaced from their life. "Your safe house is better stocked than my apartment," Evelyn remarked, running her fingers along a row of designer blouses with tags still attached. Jack leaned against the doorframe, his posture relaxed despite the circumstances. "This isn't the first time someone has needed protection, though usually it's family members or business associates, not cafe waitresses with surprisingly good hearing and questionable self-preservation instincts." A phone rang somewhere in the main room, prompting Jack to straighten. "Get cleaned up. Rest, if you can," he instructed, his voice once again the calm, authoritative tone that expected immediate compliance. "We'll discuss next steps in the morning once I've identified who ordered the hit." Alone in the suite, Evelyn's adrenaline finally crashed as she sank onto the bed's edge, trembling hands covering her face. 21 years of careful planning, working toward a photography degree while supporting herself, all potentially destroyed because she'd decided to play hero. The shower's scalding water couldn't wash away the reality of her situation, but it helped restore some clarity to her thoughts. Whoever had tried to poison Jack would undoubtedly learn about her intervention. The 3 men had seen her face, knew where she worked, could easily discover where she lived. Fresh clothes and the unexpected comfort of the bed eventually lulled her into uneasy sleep, dreams filled with gold teeth, spilled coffee, and dark eyes that seemed to see through every defense she'd ever constructed. She woke to sunlight streaming through windows that had been opaque the night before. Jack sat at the kitchen island, freshly showered and impeccably dressed in another tailored suit, multiple tablets displaying information she couldn't quite make out from her position. "Good morning," he greeted without looking up. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." Evelyn approached cautiously, accepting the offered mug with hands steadier than she expected. "Have you figured out who wants you dead? Or is that list too long to narrow down in just one night?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could filter it. A surprised bark of laughter escaped him as he finally met her gaze. "My Uncle Richard arranged it," he answered with unexpected frankness. "He's been skimming from our legitimate businesses to fund the old operations I've been shutting down. My death would return control to him and his supporters. So your own family tried to kill you, and now I'm caught in the middle of a Mafia civil war," Evelyn summarized, cradling her coffee mug like a lifeline. "Is this Tuesday for you?" Or is the attempted murder by family members more of a quarterly event? Jack's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. Your sense of humor in crisis situations is remarkable, he observed, sliding a tablet toward her. These are the men from last night. All three worked directly for my uncle's security detail. The screen displayed police mugshots alongside employment records that looked convincingly legitimate, despite what she now knew about the Carson enterprises. Evelyn recognized the faces immediately, particularly the man with the gold tooth who'd spoken to her directly. They've been arrested on weapons charges, but they'll be released by this afternoon once my uncle's lawyers intervene, Jack continued, watching her reaction carefully. They've already given statements claiming they never intended to harm anyone, just wanted to speak with me privately. Evelyn set down her coffee with deliberate care, mind racing through implications. And I'm the only witness who can contradict that statement, she concluded, meeting his gaze with newfound understanding, which makes me a liability to your uncle and his plans. Jack nodded once, expression grim as he stood and moved toward the windows, pressing his palm against a hidden panel that transformed the glass from transparent to opaque once more. I've arranged new identification, sufficient funds, and passage to Vancouver if you want to disappear. The offer hung between them, tempting in its simplicity. A clean escape from danger, the opportunity to start fresh somewhere beyond Richard Carson's influence. Evelyn studied Jack's profile against the suddenly darkened windows, noting the tension in his shoulders despite his controlled expression. Running won't solve your problem, she pointed out, moving to stand beside him, close enough to notice a small scar near his temple that had been hidden by perfect hairstyling the previous night. Your uncle will just try again once I'm gone, with someone who might succeed next time. Something shifted in Jack's expression. Surprise, perhaps, that her first concern wasn't for her own safety. I've spent my entire life navigating family politics and power struggles, he replied, voice lower than before. This isn't your battle to fight. Evelyn laughed without humor, setting her mug down on a nearby table with more force than necessary. It became my battle the moment I stopped those men from poisoning you, she countered, surprising herself with her own conviction. I made a choice. I don't run from the consequences. The penthouse's security system chimed softly, indicating an arriving elevator. Jack moved immediately, pulling Evelyn behind him with protective instinct that felt strangely natural despite their brief acquaintance. Theo's voice came through an intercom announcing, "It's just me, boss. Got the information you requested." Theo entered carrying a manila folder which he handed directly to Jack, his expression revealing nothing as he nodded acknowledgement to Evelyn before positioning himself near the elevator once more. Jack flipped through the contents, his face darkening with each page he examined. My uncle has scheduled a family meeting for tonight at the executive club, he stated once he'd finished reviewing the documents. Officially to discuss quarterly business projections, unofficially to announce my unfortunate death and his assumption of leadership. Evelyn watched emotions flicker behind Jack's carefully controlled expression. Betrayal, determination, calculation, before he looked up at her with sudden intensity. I need your help, he said simply, the words clearly unfamiliar in his mouth, costly to his pride. Before she could respond, he closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides, one hand moving to cup her cheek with unexpected gentleness. I need someone my uncle doesn't know, doesn't expect, he explained, voice barely above a whisper. Someone with remarkable observational skills and courage that borders on recklessness. The executive club gleamed like a jewel in Chicago's financial district, its Art Deco facade illuminated against the evening sky. Evelyn straightened her borrowed cocktail dress, simple black, elegant, yet forgettable, as the elevator ascended to the private dining level where the Carson family gathered. Jack stood beside her, his customary composure enhanced rather than diminished by the tension radiating from him. Remember, you're my guest, nothing more, he murmured, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced precision. Observe everything, speak only when necessary, stay within my line of sight. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area staffed by security personnel whose practiced smiles couldn't disguise their watchful assessment. Jack placed his hand at the small of Evelyn's back, guiding her forward with the confident air of a man who feared nothing within these walls. Richard Carson rose immediately upon their entrance to the main dining room, surprise briefly flickering across features that bore a familial resemblance to Jack's. "Nephew, we feared you wouldn't join us tonight," he called, voice carrying across the room with forced joviality that didn't reach his calculating eyes. Family obligations always take priority, Uncle, Jack replied smoothly, leading Evelyn to the 2 remaining seats at the long table. 20 pairs of eyes tracked their movement with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Richard's gaze lingered on Evelyn, assessment clear in his scrutiny. "You haven't introduced your companion," he prompted, lifting his wine glass in a gesture that appeared cordial but felt vaguely threatening in ways Evelyn couldn't quite articulate. Jack's smile remained perfectly pleasant as he completed introductions. "This is Evelyn Pierce, a business consultant assisting with our hospitality acquisitions," he lied smoothly, his hand returning briefly to hers beneath the table, a silent reminder of their earlier strategy session. Evelyn noted how Richard's security detail positioned themselves around the room's perimeter, hands never straying far from their concealed weapons. The 3 men from the cafe were conspicuously absent, yet their replacement counterparts watched her with particular interest that raised goosebumps along her arms. "We were just discussing the future direction of our family enterprises," Richard continued once everyone was seated, servers appearing silently to pour wine and deliver appetizers. "Your recent initiatives have generated significant discussion among the board members." The conversation flowed with superficial pleasantries masking undercurrents of tension, as Evelyn catalogued details with practiced precision, which family members deferred to Richard, which looked to Jack for subtle cues, which remained carefully neutral in this invisible power struggle. Jack played his role perfectly, discussing business projections and market expansions, as though completely unaware of the previous night's assassination attempt. Evelyn maintained her cover, offering occasional comments on hospitality trends when directly addressed, all while monitoring the servers who moved through the room with practiced efficiency. One waiter in particular caught her attention, slightly older than the others, with movements that seemed somehow more deliberate when approaching Jack's place setting. Evelyn reached for her water glass, accidentally on purpose knocking it against Jack's wine just as he lifted it to his lips. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed with embarrassment that wasn't entirely feigned, dabbing at the spilled wine with her napkin, while Jack set down the glass with remarkable composure. Beneath the table, her foot pressed against his in the prearranged signal they'd established. Richard's expression tightened almost imperceptibly as he watched Jack decline a fresh glass of the special reserve wine that had been brought specifically for him. "Not enjoying our selection tonight, nephew?" he inquired, voice light despite the tension radiating from him. Jack smiled apologetically, one hand covering Evelyn's on the table in a gesture that appeared affectionate, but actually concealed her trembling fingers. "I have an early meeting tomorrow. Best to keep a clear head," he explained, raising his water glass in a mock toast. The remainder of dinner unfolded in a choreographed dance of pleasantries and business discussions, with Evelyn growing increasingly certain of the danger surrounding them. Richard's eyes rarely left Jack, his disappointment at his nephew's continued existence poorly disguised behind forced smiles and pointed questions. As dessert was served, Richard abruptly suggested a private conversation with Jack regarding a sensitive family matter that required immediate attention. Jack squeezed Evelyn's hand once before following his uncle toward a door marked "Private" at the rear of the dining room. Evelyn remained seated only for 30 seconds before slipping away from the table, following the path Jack and Richard had taken with careful steps that drew minimal attention. The private room's door stood slightly ajar, raised voices carrying into the hallway where she pressed herself against the wall to listen. "You've always been weak, too soft to lead this family properly," Richard snarled, his cultured facade abandoned in private. "Your father would be ashamed of what you've become, dismantling everything we built over 3 generations for what? Legitimacy? Respectability?" Jack's response came with deadly calm that sent chills down Evelyn's spine. "My father died because of the business you cherish so much, Uncle. I'm not destroying our family legacy. I'm ensuring we have a future beyond prison sentences or early graves." A crash echoed from within the room, glass breaking against a wall, followed by heavy footsteps. "The board has already voted," Richard declared, triumph coloring his words. "By morning, you'll be removed as CEO, and control will return to those who understand what this family truly represents." Evelyn risked a glance through the doorway, witnessing Richard's bodyguards restraining Jack while his uncle circled him like a predator. "Did you really think I wouldn't have contingencies in place?" Richard taunted, producing a syringe from his jacket pocket. "No poison in wine glasses this time, just a direct approach." Before conscious thought formed, Evelyn burst through the doorway, leveraging the element of surprise to drive her elbow into the nearest guard's solar plexus. "Jack!" she cried out, ducking beneath a second guard's reaching arms with instinctive grace born of desperate circumstances. The momentary distraction gave Jack the opening he needed, his head snapping backward to connect with his captor's nose in a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed across imported wallpaper as the man released him, howling in pain and clutching his shattered face. Richard lunged toward Jack with syringe raised, eyes wild with desperation and fury that transformed his distinguished features into something monstrous. "You ungrateful child," he spat, stumbling as Evelyn grabbed a crystal decanter from a nearby table and hurled it toward his feet. Glass shattered across the floor, Richard's momentum carrying him forward onto the razor-sharp shards that sliced through his expensive leather shoes. He screamed in rage and pain, the syringe flying from his grasp and skittering across the polished wooden floor toward Evelyn. Jack moved with lethal efficiency, disarming the remaining guard with a precise strike that left the larger man gasping for breath against the wall. "Call security," Richard commanded through gritted teeth, struggling to stand on bleeding feet while reaching inside his jacket for what Evelyn assumed was a concealed weapon. The double doors burst open before either man could move, revealing Theo and 4 armed men whose appearance caused the room to freeze in tableau. "Security's here," Jack stated with cold satisfaction, as his men secured Richard and his bodyguards with practiced efficiency. "Just not yours, Uncle." Richard's face contorted with hatred as realization dawned. "You knew," he hissed, wincing as Theo bound his wrists behind his back with professional detachment. "You planned this entire evening as a trap, but how could you possibly have known about the vote?" Jack straightened his tie with meticulous precision, despite the chaos surrounding them. "Because the board meeting you referenced never happened," he replied, his voice carrying the absolute authority that seemed to reshape the very air in the room. "The board members answer to me, not you." Evelyn watched silently as the power dynamic shifted visibly, Jack's carefully orchestrated countermove revealing itself in Richard's crumbling expression. Everything, from the dinner to her presence to the private meeting, had been calculated to force his uncle's hand. The family members in the main dining room had fallen silent, watching wide-eyed as Richard was escorted past their table toward the service elevator. Jack followed, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard as tempered steel while he addressed the stunned gathering. "Enjoy your dessert, everyone. The Carson family business continues as planned." As security cleared the room, Jack turned to Evelyn, something shifting in his expression as he took in her disheveled appearance and the determined set of her jaw. Without warning, he closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides, one hand cupping her face while the other circled her waist with surprising gentleness. "That wasn't part of our plan," Jack murmured, his forehead resting against hers as the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly ebbed. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone with unexpected tenderness that contrasted sharply with the calculated violence he'd displayed moments earlier. Evelyn allowed herself a tremulous smile, her hands still shaking slightly as she gripped the lapels of his suit jacket. "The part where I saved your life again, or the part where your uncle tried to inject you with what I'm guessing wasn't a multivitamin?" Jack's soft laughter vibrated between them, genuine amusement breaking through his composed exterior for perhaps the first time since they'd met. "Both, I suppose," he admitted, leading her from the private room back toward the main dining area where shell-shocked family members still lingered. The remaining Carson family watched their approach with expressions ranging from calculation to outright fear, their allegiances visibly realigning in real time as Jack guided Evelyn to the head of the table. Power shifts happened quickly in their world, survival instincts prompting immediate adaptation. "My uncle has decided to take an extended sabbatical effective immediately," Jack announced, his hand remaining at the small of Evelyn's back, in a gesture that claimed her as unquestionably his. "All business operations will continue under my direction, with some significant restructuring forthcoming." Murmurs rippled through the assembled family members, questions hovering unspoken in the air as Jack calmly took his seat, gesturing for Evelyn to take the chair beside him. The evening concluded with superficial pleasantries masking profound upheaval, a Carson family specialty. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of Jack's penthouse, Evelyn paced restlessly while he poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter. "What happens now?" she asked, accepting the offered drink with fingers that had finally stopped trembling. "Your uncle has been neutralized, but his supporters remain." Jack studied her over the rim of his glass, shadows beneath his eyes the only evidence of the strain he'd endured. "Now I complete what I started, transitioning our family away from illegal operations toward legitimate enterprises that don't require murder to maintain power." Evelyn sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted as the events of the past 48 hours crashed over her. "And what about me? Do I just go back to serving coffee like none of this ever happened?" she questioned, unable to imagine returning to ordinary life after glimpsing this shadowed world. Jack set his glass down carefully before joining her on the sofa, maintaining enough distance to respect boundaries while remaining close enough to convey sincerity. "That depends entirely on what you want, Evelyn," he replied, her name spoken with a gentleness that seemed reserved exclusively for her. The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities neither had anticipated when fate thrust them together in a rain-soaked cafe. Evelyn considered her interrupted photography studies, her tiny apartment shared with a roommate who knew nothing of Mafia power struggles or assassination attempts. "I want something real," she finally answered, meeting his gaze directly. "If I stay, it's not as your employee or your shield or your convenient ally. It would have to be as your equal, with honest communication and genuine partnership." Jack's expression shifted through surprise to thoughtful consideration before settling into something dangerously close to admiration. "Most people in your position would demand money, protection, or both," he observed, studying her with renewed intensity. "Yet, you ask for authenticity instead." The weight of his family name seemed to momentarily lift from his shoulders as he considered her proposal, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the carefully constructed facade of power. Jack Carson had spent his entire life calculating risks, yet nothing had prepared him for the unpredictable variable that was Evelyn Pierce. His fingers traced absently along the rim of his glass, a habit Evelyn had noticed emerged only when he contemplated decisions with far-reaching consequences. Partnership would mean access to everything, the legitimate businesses and the shadows we're still working to eliminate, he explained, searching her eyes for any hesitation. Evelyn shrugged one shoulder, exhaustion making her more frank than perhaps wisdom would dictate. "I've spent my life watching people. It's why I noticed the men in the cafe, why I heard their whispered plans when others wouldn't have," she explained. "I've seen enough pretense to last a lifetime." The silence between them stretched, charged with unspoken possibilities in the strange intimacy born of shared danger. Jack finally broke it with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Partnership in what sense, exactly?" he asked, the question careful but weighted with implications both business and personal. Evelyn set her untouched whiskey on the coffee table, gathering courage before meeting his gaze directly. "In every sense," she answered simply, refusing to elaborate further, and forcing him to navigate the ambiguity she deliberately created. Something shifted in Jack's expression, a subtle transformation from calculated restraint to genuine vulnerability that was more revealing than any declaration could have been. "That would be complicated," he offered, though the way he leaned subtly closer betrayed his interest despite his caution. "I saved your life twice in 2 days," Evelyn replied with unexpected confidence, closing the remaining distance between them until only inches separated them. "I think I can handle complicated." 3 months later, Evelyn adjusted the lens of her camera, capturing the Chicago skyline from the penthouse balcony as sunrise painted the city in hues of gold and rose. Photography had become more than a hobby since Jack funded her first professional gallery showing, featuring urban landscapes interspersed with strikingly intimate portraits of anonymous power players. The sliding door opened behind her, Jack's familiar footsteps approaching as she continued adjusting settings for the changing light. "The Richardson merger paperwork arrived this morning," he informed her, handing over a steaming mug of coffee prepared exactly how she preferred. Another successful conversion from their previous business model. Evelyn accepted both the coffee and the news with a satisfied smile, setting her camera aside momentarily. "How many does that make now?" 7 former competitors transitioned to legitimate enterprises under the Carson umbrella in just 1 fiscal quarter. Jack settled beside her at the railing, his posture more relaxed than she'd ever witnessed during those first tension-filled days. 8, actually, he corrected, pride evident in his voice. "My grandfather would have called it weakness, but our profit margins have increased 23% since we abandoned the old ways." Theo's discreet knock preceded his entrance to the balcony, tablet in hand displaying security footage. "The last of Richard's loyalists have been located in Milwaukee," he reported, his formerly intimidating presence now a reassuring constant in their daily lives. "They've accepted your offer of amnesty in exchange for information." The transformation of the Carson empire progressed with methodical precision, each former rival or reluctant family member carefully integrated into Jack's vision of legitimacy. What had begun as a controversial strategy had evolved into a business model that even the most traditional family members couldn't deny was extraordinarily profitable. Evelyn's unique perspective had proven invaluable in these negotiations, her ability to read micro-expressions and anticipate reactions, giving Jack an edge his competitors couldn't match. Their partnership had evolved into something symbiotic that fascinated Chicago's business elite, though none dared question the former waitress who now sat confidently at Jack Carson's right hand. Jack nodded approval, his hand finding Evelyn's with the casual intimacy they'd developed since that night at the executive club. "Schedule the meeting for Thursday," he instructed Theo, who acknowledged the directive before discreetly withdrawing to give them privacy once more. Morning light caught the elegant engagement ring adorning Evelyn's left hand, the diamond catching fire as she turned to face Jack fully. "Your family still whispers about us, you know," she remarked, amusement coloring her tone as she recalled the stunned expressions at their engagement announcement 2 weeks prior. Jack's smile held genuine warmth, the calculating hardness that once defined his features now softened in her presence. "They'll adjust, as they've adjusted to everything else," he replied, with the confidence of someone accustomed to shaping circumstances rather than being controlled by them. The Carson family had indeed adapted, albeit reluctantly in some cases, to both Jack's legitimate business transition and his unconventional choice of partner. Richard remained under house arrest at a remote family property, stripped of power, but permitted to maintain appearances for the sake of public perception. Evelyn sometimes marveled at how completely her life had transformed, from struggling waitress to influential partner in one of Chicago's most powerful families. She still maintained her habit of observing details others missed, a skill now directed toward identifying potential opportunities rather than threats. Their wedding plans progressed with the same efficiency that characterized all Carson operations, though Evelyn had insisted on maintaining certain boundaries between family business and their personal life. Jack had agreed with surprising readiness, perhaps equally eager to compartmentalize the different aspects of their shared existence. The previous evening's family dinner had demonstrated their evolving dynamic, with Jack's cousins and remaining loyal uncles now deferring to Evelyn almost as readily as they did to him. She wielded her influence carefully, conscious of the responsibility that accompanied such power. "I invited Anna from the cafe to the wedding," Evelyn mentioned, watching Jack's reaction carefully. "She doesn't know anything about your family beyond what appears in the business sections, but she was kind to me during my time there." Jack considered this for a moment before nodding agreement. "Invite whoever you wish," he said simply, his trust in her judgment now implicit after months of her proving herself his equal in both intelligence and resolve. "This new chapter of the Carson legacy belongs to both of us." The phone in Jack's pocket chimed with his distinctive message alert, but he made no move to check it immediately, a small but significant change from the man who once prioritized business above all else. Instead, he drew Evelyn closer, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I never imagined that hearing the words, 'Drink this now, trust me,' would completely change the course of my life," Jack murmured against her skin, rare vulnerability coloring his tone. "You saved more than my life that night. You saved me from becoming what my uncle wanted." Evelyn leaned into his embrace, remembering the frightened waitress who'd made an impulsive decision in a rain-soaked cafe what felt like lifetimes ago. "We saved each other," she corrected softly, the truth of it settling between them with comfortable certainty. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. Your support is what keeps me creating these stories for you.